talking about being salt and light in our world and in our community. Your life has had a pretty amazing journey, expected and unexpected, that has allowed you to be salt and light in your community. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. About 10 years ago, shortly after my husband Mark and I had moved to Maine, I was pregnant with our first son. I was due any day. And when I went into labor, there was a cord accident, and so our son was delivered stillborn. So it was a shocking, devastating experience. We had gone to the hospital expecting a healthy, living child, and instead had to start dealing with the death of our first son. So, that's the short version of our journey. And we then, God from the beginning opened several doors for us. Right away on the day we lost Noah, the lactation consultant felt compelled to tell me about the option of breast milk donation, which to me immediately felt like something I could do to bring a tiny bit of good out of the tragedy that had happened to us. And we immediately started thinking about Romans 8:28, about how God works for good for the people who love him and works all things for good for the people who love him and are called according to his will. And so even though we were devastated, that felt right. And in those early months, that kind of is how it went for us. There were doors that opened before us, and we stepped through them, not because we felt this huge drive to do the things, but because they were presented to us. That same lactation consultant brought to our attention the fact that babies who are stillborn in the state of Maine receive a death certificate, but no recognition of the fact that they were ever alive. She helped us get involved in legislation to get a certificate of birth resulting in stillbirth, which anyone who has a stillborn baby now in the state of Maine can receive in addition to their death certificate. And from there, brought up the idea of doing a walk to raise funds for research and bereavement, and one other thing that I'm forgetting, education. And so we started doing that. And so some of those things kind of came together just because the opportunity was presented to us, and we felt compelled to walk through those doors. And since then, we've seen how God was really at work in bringing those opportunities to us. We, prior to that, hadn't really been the activist type. It wasn't really who we are, and in our grief, for much of what we were doing was some internal processing, a lot of prayer, a lot of working together, and God did bring us a huge sense of peace. I think earlier along than I heard other people who we had met earlier along than they were perhaps achieving that sense of peace. Not that we aren't still very sad and always will be very sad that our first son is not with us. But anyway, in the years since, as we've continued down this path, I remember earlier, maybe the first 2 or 3 years, someone told me that, oh yes, people who have losses, often they start these things and then they drop them after they have another baby and they start to feel more healed, and then they just move on and they don't do anything with that topic anymore, even though everyone carries it with them forever. It's maybe not something you act on as much. But as we went on in the journey, I think we saw around us more and more of a need for these spaces to be created, because stillbirths continue to happen and people continue to lose children and continue to feel the isolation and just devastation that we ourselves had experienced. And so we started to feel pretty strongly about this idea of creating space for people. And it's allowed for a lot of good opportunities to connect with people. Every year we still do this walk, in large part to raise awareness, but also to give the people who have had losses something active they can do to remember their babies, to say, yes, this happened to me, to feel like they're they're doing something active. We also help put on a vigil to remember babies who have been lost, and which gives people a space to tell their stories. And I've had the opportunity to start a support group too. So just lots of connections with people, and we feel God at work in the midst of it in a way that just has been really amazing to see. But 10 years ago, when I was sitting in the hospital trying to wrap my brain around how to move forward, I never could have predicted that this is how it would play out. But I feel incredibly blessed at the way God has used it, used our loss, and continues to use it, and I feel confident we'll continue to use it for the rest of our lives, and also we'll use it in our children's lives. It's been part of, we try not to have it be too big a part of our parenting. We don't want it to be overbearing, but our children know about this story, and they see us and how we are playing it out, and I hope that will impact them as they move through life. And I've run out of things.